Imagine being trapped inside a 311-foot steel tube in heat over 120 degrees, breathing air thick with diesel fumes and sweat, knowing that if you abandon your patrol station even a single day early, an entire Japanese convoy might slip through and the war could drag on for another year. Now imagine doing that for 60 days straight, while the enemy could barely endure 30. That difference, 60 versus 30, is how the United States quietly choked an empire to death without firing a single battleship gun after Pearl Harbor. This is the true story of one of the most decisive weapons of World War II, a story most people have never heard. December 8, 1941. The smoke was still rising over Pearl Harbor when the first secret envelopes marked most immediate were torn open at the submarine base. Duty officers spread charts of the South China Sea and the Philippine archipelago across the table and began drawing new patrol boxes in red grease pencil. For 20 years the doctrine had been carved in stone. Submarines were the eyes of the fleet. They would scout, report, and withdraw so the big guns of the battle line could decide the day. That doctrine died at 0755 on December 7th in burning oil and twisted steel. 8 battleships lay sunk or crippled, and overnight the Pacific Fleet had only one offensive weapon left, its submarines. Nobody yet understood that the coming war would not be decided by how deep a boat could dive, how fast she could run, or even how brave her crew was. It would be decided by something infinitely more ordinary: how many consecutive days 77 men could remain fighting fit inside a 311-foot steel pipe when the temperature never dropped below 100 degrees and there was no fresh air to breathe. In the frantic weeks that followed, the old porcelain-hulled S-boats and the early fleet submarines of the Asiatic Fleet lasted barely 3 to 4 weeks on station. By day 10 the bread was green with mold, by day 12 the drinking water tasted of diesel, and by day 18 the interior temperature passed 110 degrees Fahrenheit with 95% humidity. Patrol reports from December 1941 through February 1942 are full of the same desperate phrases: ventilation inadequate, crew efficiency falling off rapidly, request early return to tender. Captains who had trained their whole careers to fight decisive fleet actions were suddenly begging to come home because their men could no longer think straight in the heat. The Bureau of Ships in Washington and the medical officers in Pearl Harbor reached the same chilling conclusion at the same time. Endurance was not a matter of fuel or torpedoes. It was a matter of human physiology in tropical heat. So began one of the quietest, most decisive engineering races of the entire war. Between March 1942 and July 1943, every new Gato, Balao, and Tench-class submarine rolling down the ways at Groton, Mare Island, Manitowoc, and Portsmouth received 3 revolutionary systems that sound boring today but changed history: a 15-ton air conditioning plant, forced draft ventilation that actually moved cool dry air through every compartment, and refrigeration capacity big enough to keep meat fresh for 60 days. At the same time, older boats in the yards were gutted and retrofitted with the same equipment. A single circular from the Bureau of Ships, number 3142, made it official: no submarine would again go to war in the tropics without full climate control. 1 compressor and a couple of chilled water coils, it turned out, were worth more than an extra torpedo tube. By January 1943, Rear Admiral Charles O. Lockwood took command of all Pacific submarines and issued the order that defined the rest of the war: remain on station until torpedoes are expended or provisions exhausted. Return only when further combat effectiveness is doubtful. That order was not bravado. It was cold calculation made possible by ice-cold air and fresh food. Submarine tenders at Pearl Harbor, Brisbane, and later Fremantle were turned into floating factories. Machine shops, bakeries, 3,000-item spare parts kits, and 11-day turnaround times became the new normal. Quartermasters learned to pack 60 days of food for 77 men into every corner of the boat. 10,500 pounds of frozen meat, 7,000 pounds of flour, cases of canned goods stacked in the passageways, nets of onions and potatoes hanging from the overhead like strange tropical fruit. For the first week of every patrol, the crew literally walked on boxes of food. By the 8th week, the boat rode higher in the water and there was room to swing a cat again. The results showed up immediately. In 1941 to 42, the average patrol lasted 24 days. By mid-1943, it was 45 days. By late 1944, the best boats were doing 60 to 62 days as routine. USS Sea Lion II came back from a 62-day patrol in the Luzon Strait in October 1944, having fired 22 of her 24 torpedoes, covered 12,100 nautical miles, and recorded exactly 0 medical cases. Internal temperature for the entire patrol, 86 degrees Fahrenheit. The Japanese submarine force never came close. Bound by pre-war doctrine that saw submarines as scouts for the decisive fleet battle, crippled by material shortages, and operating without air conditioning or adequate refrigeration, Japanese boats rotated home after 28 to 32 days whether they still had torpedoes or not. Their crews lost 15 to 20 pounds per patrol and suffered widespread beriberi and heat exhaustion. American crews lost an average of 3 pounds and came home ready for another round after 11 days alongside the tender. That single disparity, 60 days versus 30, multiplied across an entire force became unstoppable. Between 1941 and 1945, American shipyards launched 288 fleet submarines. Japan completed roughly 125. An American boat completed 5 or 6 long patrols per year. A Japanese boat managed 3 or 4 short ones. American boats were always there, every day, in every sea lane. Japanese boats appeared in pulses and then vanished. The arithmetic was merciless. Over 5 million tons of Japanese merchant shipping, 60% of their entire merchant fleet, went to the bottom under the periscopes of American submarines. Oil imports from the East Indies fell from 40 million barrels in 1942 to virtually 0 in 1945. Factories shut down not because they were bombed to rubble, but because there was no longer any bauxite, rubber, rice, or coal to feed them. Pilots trained for years sat on the flight line because there was no aviation gasoline. The empire that depended on sea lanes starved to death on dry land. The price was savage. 52 American submarines never came home. 3,505 officers and men, 22% of everyone who ever wore dolphins in the Pacific, the highest loss rate of any branch of the U.S. military in World War II. They paid with 60-day patrols in the middle of typhoon season, with nights spent rigged for depth charge, with weeks of red light silence while destroyers pinged overhead. They paid so that convoys that left Singapore or Saigon never reached Japan. They paid so that by August 1945 Japan had nothing left to move, nothing left to fight with, and nothing left to eat. History loves the thunder of Midway, the firestorms over Tokyo, the flag raising on Suribachi. But the Pacific War was quietly, decisively won in the refrigeration compartments and air conditioning ducts of 300 identical fleet boats that most people have never heard of. It was won by engineers who understood that a crew that can still think clearly on day 55 will beat a crew that is half-blind with heat stroke on day 25 every single time. It was won by logisticians who baked fresh bread on submarine tenders and turned boats around in 11 days. It was won by quartermasters who could pack 270,000 meals into a hole the size of a small house, and by machinists' mates who carried a complete set of spare everything so that nothing short of a direct hit sent them home early. The silent service asked for no parades. Most of them came home, handed in their patrol report, drank a cold beer, and went back out for another 60 days. The ones who didn't come home are remembered on black granite at Pearl Harbor today. Sea Lion, Wahoo, Tang, Trigger, Harder, Scamp, Growler, and 45 more boats with the names of every man who rode them etched beneath. They turned the Pacific Ocean into a desert for Japan, one convoy at a time, one extra week on patrol at a time, one cool breath of conditioned air at a time. The great lesson of the Pacific submarine campaign is almost sounds too simple to be profound. Wars are not won by the side with the best weapons. They are won by the side that can keep its weapons in the fight longer than the enemy believes is possible. In the end, the decisive weapon was not the Mark 14 torpedo, though it finally worked. It was not the SJ radar, not the bathythermograph, not even the courage of the men who rowed the boats. The decisive weapon was a 15-ton air conditioning plant running night and day so that 77 Americans could stay sharp, stay fed, and stay deadly for twice as long as the enemy thought humanly possible. And that, more than any battle, is how the Pacific War was really won.